Welcome to PADDLECAST with Betsy
and Billy. On PADDLECAST, we talk to paddlers who are pushing the limits, paddlers who are pushing their own limits, and pushing the limits of paddle sports.
Today, we are talking with one of those paddlers. So on PADDLECAST, we have Emily King. Emily is about to be one of the first stand-up paddleboarders to race the Devizes to Westminster. And 2025 is the first year that the DW has allowed SUPs to enter. So they've started this by opening up the 4-day stages race. So we've talked a bit on PADDLECAST already about the straight through race, which is nonstop from the Saturday to Sunday. The stages race runs from the Friday, so that's Good Friday, to Easter Monday. And it is 34 miles, 36 miles, 38 miles, and 10 miles over each of those 4 days. This is a trial year for SUP at DW, and they've actually said that you'll be getting a DW finisher medal, but I believe they've said that they're not quite going to hand out the full awards and trophies yet, which personally I feel a little bit skeptical, but I guess, first year, it's a trial, and we will certainly be celebrating that achievement here on PADDLECAST. So Emily has been racing SUP for about 15 years. She is a professional SUP coach, and she's also been the SUP lead at Canoe Wales since last year. Emily, welcome to PADDLECAST. Thank you so much for being here. I know I've given a very short intro for you here, so tell everyone what are some of the highlights that I've missed in that introduction.
Oh, hi guys. Thanks so much for having me along. It's great to meet you all and to come along and talk about some of the things I'm getting on with this year, which just seems huge at the moment. So yeah, I've been paddling about 15 to 20 years now. And I guess like most people, I stood on my first board and wanted to just be on it every single day of my life. And from that took up competitive paddling, which was 12'6" in the old days. On race boards, and became British 12'6" champion for multiple years in technical, sprint. And like most people, got hooked on the sport, and it's just been the most incredible journey of my life. The people I've met, the opportunities to not just race, but to take part in my own personal challenges as well. And then bring paddling to other people through my career and being patrons of charities, etc. So yeah, it's a massively holistic approach to not just being on the water, but anything and everything I can do to be on and around people that want to be as passionate as me too.
I think you've given a lot back to the sport is the sense that I get from a lot of the work that you've done and continue to do.
Well, that's really kind, Betsy. Well, there's a balance in SUP, and that's not just metaphorical for me.
So tell us about what motivated you to sign up for DW, and do you think it's a big deal that DW has finally opened up? This race has been going since the 1940s. Is it a big deal that it's finally opened up for stand-up paddleboarders? And what do you think is the draw of this race, not just for you, but for other stand-up paddleboarders who might be interested? Thank you to our sponsors, Tango Charlie Lights. Tango Charlie offers lightweight lights and brackets that have been purpose-built for paddlers. Tango Charlie was founded because of a close call. Reggie Probst had been paddling K1 and surfski for years when on one early morning paddle in the dark, he was almost run over by a fishing boat because they couldn't see him. He realized that duct taping torches or bike lights to his boat wasn't enough to keep him safe in the dark. So he designed something new. Sleek, lightweight brackets that are easy to put on and take off your boat and stay put while you're paddling. Tango Charlie lights are not boat lights adapted for use on a ski or kayak. They are lights designed and built for paddlers by a paddler. Go to tangocharlielights.com.au to find the right lights for you.
Well, first thing to say about it is it's an absolute privilege to be able to paddle on this event or race or whatever you want to call it. Depends on my cycle of the day. But it also shows how far SUP has come as a sport and the integration into these great events. And also pushing the boundaries of what athletes can do in terms of on a SUP. And I've seen that progression over the years. And it's absolutely brilliant as well that we're still pushing those boundaries and we're not putting that sport into its own category without saying, well, there's loads of stuff that's already paved the way. Why not jump in? And, I really hope to see the kayaking and C1, C2s and so on coming and doing some of the SUP events as well, because it's so important that sports people work together. We've got so much that we can give each other as well. It's incredible that they've had that open-mindedness to say, let's do this, let's all work together. It's very brave of them as well, because we're an unknown. So it's an unknown category. And when you're organising a massive event, that really shakes things up. And what you want to be able to do is have certainty when you're running a big race, because it makes the cogs run much easier. So to bring people in on a craft that they don't know, they don't understand the design of, and they don't know the athletes, because we haven't come up through the grading stages that are happening in kayaking or canoeing, is incredibly inclusive of them. And, I can't thank them enough for giving us that opportunity.
Would you say this is a sort of a chance for SUP to prove itself in some ways? I don't want to place undue burden on your shoulders representing SUP at the first DW, but I think that's kind of the situation that we're in.
Yeah, of course it is. We're going to take the falls. We're going to break. We are, if you're an engineer, we're the stress testing, we're the destruction testing. Says she who's just got a brand new board. So watch this space on that. But yeah, we really need to sort of go in and pave the way. And I do it looking at it not just from a very competitive point of view, but from a point of view of thinking, this has got to be enjoyable, this has got to be aspirational, but it's also got to be doable. So the rule book that's been written that we have to adhere to when we enter a competition like this is there to keep people safe, and it's been sort of written over the years, which is great. But again, it goes back to their open-mindedness by doing it as a test event this year. They're saying, okay, we realise what we've got down on paper is great, but actually we might need to change that. So we might not just want the top 10% of the world's athletes coming and doing it really quickly. We might want, aspirational paddlers to come along and be able to say, if I train hard, if I work hard at this and I prove my worth, I might just be able to do it. If those times are a little bit longer, then perhaps we might be doing them as top athletes. So it's about bringing sport to everybody and making it doable. And we see that in so many other sports. So let's go and pave the way, get it wrong, get it right, and then show everybody that actually that's fine. You can do it too.
I was a bit skeptical about allowing SUPs on DW, but because of the time limits. I'm imagining you're going to be fairly close to the time limit each day, even as a fast SUP.
So again, it depends really on conditions. So I've been training all winter, which I know we'll talk about a little bit, but we are massive sails. So, we can have a really, really great time going super fast if we've got the wind behind us, but we can have a pretty awful time if we've got the wind heading into us. So I've been time trialing all the winter really to see what the worst case scenarios are and the best case scenarios are. And with the endurance training as well, specifically over those 4 days, you're not just looking for optimum time on the first day, because you need to be sustainable and recoverable for the next 2-3 days afterwards. So it's about finding the middle ground, it's about finding the fastest times, but it's also looking at the conditions, what's happening, and then saying what's really the most doable, slowest time that people will be able to do that in as well. And finding somewhere in the middle that suits everybody.
I really want to ask about the Thames 200 Ultra, and that race. It happened for the first time last August. It covers the full length of the Thames, so half the course is the same as DW, and it's a very different season. It was happening in August. DW happens in the springtime, and I really enjoyed, Emily, getting to get out there and watch you race at the Thames 200 Ultra, which was a mix of stand-up paddleboards. James Fletcher went out on his prone board, and then we also had the kayaks out as well, and canoeists. And I know you faced a lot of challenges during that race, sort of specific to being on SUP. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those challenges were during that race and how you are kind of taking that away to, learn new things before doing another ultra on a similar course?
Yeah, it was a really interesting learning curve for me, and I'm sure it was for the race organisers as well. And I knew that it would completely and utterly be chaotic, and be that it would just be something that none of us had ever really gone out and done, in this country anyway, and to then go through the night as well. And we were supposed to do it in 24 hours, but a lot of the guys actually didn't manage to complete in that time. It was 34. So it started really well, but it was very cold and very wet. And if you don't know Lechlade, which is where the Thames starts, it's tiny little stream, and it's really, really turny, and there's no flow on it at all. You're sort of paddling us up. You're trying to get some glide up on it to get it up to speed. If you were cycling a bike, you're in small gears the whole time. You're never able to turn the gearbox around or the gears around to get it up into a bigger gear. And it's difficult because you're stalling the whole time, and there are weeds, and we've got a fin on the bottom of our boards. Now, on that race, I actually chose to do it on a racing inflatable, which for the other communities of paddle sports, they don't quite understand at the moment. But within SUP, the technical race boards that are inflatable are nearly as expensive as the hard boards, and they are technically just as brilliant. You possibly lose about 20% on them. But the upside for an ultra with that is you can trash it. You can throw it around, you can hit anything, you can fall on it. It's pretty indestructible. So that was great. But again, because it didn't have a hard side to it, we call it a rail, and the water doesn't channel along the sides of it quite so much, so you don't get that power and that glide per stroke, which is fine for me because I was a 12'6" paddler, and it's a much shorter paddle stroke. So if you were to think in terms of a paddle steamer, when I was paddling 12'6", I was like a paddle steamer. I had a really high cadence, and I was just bringing the board along the whole time, like a little skimmer stone. And my nickname back then was Pocket Rocket. When we went up to 14 foot and then added an inflatable, it was a very different gear system for me to get into. So when we were on the Thames Ultra, I went back to my 12'6" on the inflatable paddle stroke, and it worked brilliantly. So when we got to the first checkpoint and we were supposed to food up, I had to change some of the stuff and move some of the stuff about on my board, and I didn't fuel up properly. Because I was in a bad state of mind, and there were people on the pontoon and they wanted to chat, and I was just like, I'm just not in the headspace for this at all. I just wanted to get out there and just get back into my rhythm. So again, you never learn these things till you learn them, and actually it's just as important to go out and get it wrong on these races, because that's where you have growth and potential of learning how to become better at what you do. So then we sort of paddled on down to Oxford. And by about Oxford, I was starting to get back into my headspace, but we'd had some horrific weather as well. And the inflatable board sort of was doing what it wanted to now. I really started to settle down, and I've started to realise then that if I was going to paddle into the night, then I needed to come up with a bit of a game plan around it as well. Now, the other really important learning that I did understand from what we were doing there is that I hadn't done enough wrecking of what was going to come up. And when I say that, you can know a river on a certain day, but you don't know it until you've done it in every season. Um, and that's where training comes in as well. So it's a case of that local knowledge, really. And you can paddle with people that have local knowledge, you can walk that local knowledge, but you need it. You need to go and spend time in those environments, and you need to do the hard graft. And without that, you are not prepared. So it was a case of then when we started to approach night, and I think I met you guys tonight at one of the checkpoints, I had caught up with a friend of mine, Alex Tira, who was also on it. She was on a hard shell, and she had pushed pretty hard. She's an amazing paddler, mid-distance paddler, but she'll tell you she's not an endurance paddler. Now, I had my husband crewing for me, and he had our 8-year-old son with him then. And it was a brilliant experience, but he was seriously concerned about me paddling into the night by myself, which I have to say I wasn't as concerned about. But you have to appreciate when you're doing these things, you're not always in the best place to make those safety calls about what's happening, who you are, and what you're heading into, because you're in such a wormhole that you will do anything to get there. And we were heading down towards Reading and some pretty nasty locks. And he just was, it's pitch black. We've had storms coming through. I'm not particularly keen on you just carrying on. Why don't you and Alex paddle together? So Alex and I made a pact that we would paddle into the night together, but we also said that either of us, if one of us couldn't do it, the other one would give up, because both our partners were just like, no, this is not what we want for you. And there are times to take risks, and there are times not to take risks. So I learned a lot about myself on that one as well. And Alex and I called it at about 3, 4 in the morning. And I remember Alex's husband coming with a coffee for us and a little portion of chips each, and we sat on the quayside, wherever it was we got out, and we were like a pair of drunk teenagers just giggling away. We just had the best time of our lives. But one day I will go back and do the whole thing.
So should we go on to about your training for the 4-day DW? What have you done different this time? And then the next question that I really want to know is, how long do you expect each stage to take? Which you've sort of covered with your if the winds, if it's easterly or westerly. But if you can get, if you're willing to share the top secret information.
So when we signed up for DW, it was really apparent to me that there had to be a great deal of training. But having done trail running and ultra marathons before, you also realise that you can't just run great distances all the time and expect your body to hold up. So a smart training package is always what's called for these sorts of events. And what do I mean by that? Well, it really means that it's you're planning a window of your training to accelerate to reach your peak, or your peak potential for whatever the activity is that you're doing. So you're gradually building your tolerances up, of what you're doing, and hopefully your outcome is that you're better, smarter, faster, or whatever it is your outcome is going to be, or you can go for longer, for me in this instance. So the training really started in December. I'd had a break from last year's season, and it was just normal paddling for me, really. It was just getting back out on the water, doing 45 minutes to an hour and a half, 3 or 4 times a week, and getting back out in the running. And then I have a principle of only ever loading 10% throughout the first 2 months. So by that, I mean loading effort or time. So your body has this really slow transition time to get used to what you're doing, because every time you do something harder or put more load through you, you're basically breaking yourself. So your body, especially at my age, needs to repair, and the tissue needs repair. So I always say that the rest is just as important as the training is. So then I started canal paddling, which is pretty easy to do in the winter because you haven't got anything to worry about. So it's not like going on the ocean where everything can train the whole time. And I live up in Wales, so I've got the Brecon Canal, Brecon and Monmouth Canal, which runs through the Brecon beacons, and there's no trees at that time of year hiding your view. So you can imagine training was really hard. No, it was beautiful. So I was getting on and just started doing some days on that, and it was really, really hard. It was cold. It was 2 or 3 degrees. It's boring because you haven't got anybody with you, and it's just paddle, paddle, paddle. And I hadn't had my new hardboard delivered either. I've got a carbon board that I'll be racing DW this year. So again, to help resistance training, I was training still on my inflatable board, but it also meant that for the hours and hours and hours training that I was doing, I was not going to be running my kit as well. And so the first paddle I did was a 35-mile paddle, and it, it was so tiring. I was absolutely shattered by the end of it. To the point that my husband was crewing for me. That meant he would pop up at various places and throw hot drinks and food at me. And I'm always on a tracker, so he always knows where I'm going to pop up, and he tries to get there before me. And I was like, oh, really? How far have I been? How long have I been paddling? You know, that whole equilibrium of it just being really relaxed and having rhythm, and every little thing that can annoy you when you first start pushing yourself like that will, whether it's a hairband that just doesn't feel comfortable, your brain tries to trick you the whole time and distract you. So really, rather than your body will do anything, it breathes autonomously without you having to put any response into it. The thing that's really hard to do is to control your brain. So those early paddles really were about that conditioning of the brain, and it doesn't really matter what the body does. It's just going to do what it does, but we just need to learn to keep focused. So they were quite slow paddles, and some of them had headwinds. So within 3 or 4 weeks, you start to see quite a big change in your paddling, and certainly everything starts to feel. I always like to sort of refer to it, so everything feels lighter. Even carrying your board feels lighter, making decisions feels more lighter and more natural. So when we started to get to that, I'm looking at recovery rates on my training rather than output rates. Then, as we started to go through that, we were looking at some of the route that DW goes down, and we had to try and plan a window of when we could start going down and recceing what it is that we wanted to do on the DW, so that I could mentally plot it, so I knew I'd been through each part of that and seen it at least once. And then also that my husband could work out how he could get from A to B and be where he was going to be. Because if he's stressed on the water, I'm stressed, and vice versa. And again, it's distraction testing. That's actually happened to us, and we've fallen out a couple of times, but it's great because that's what you need to do when you're part of a team. You need to understand each other's weaknesses and have empathy for that, and then it doesn't happen on the actual race itself. So you all know your job, you all learn your jobs, and you can rely on each other rather than second guessing. So by the time we sort of got to looking at doing the water size series, and the water size series, for those that don't know, is some of the stages that are sort of pre-raced by some of the clubs of the DW. So they'll go and do them, but my work schedule just wouldn't fit in and around them. So we were a bit disappointed not to do that, but we were going down the day before. Perhaps some of those stage races were happening, and I was just running through those stages. And I can honestly say that I am so glad that I did that. And I know that some people they thrive on just turning up and not knowing what's happening, but I can only really control my own athletic outlook. And it really did mean that I could just go and understand exactly what was happening, how it was going to happen, and how much energy it was going to take. And DW has a lot of locks. So if you're not used to doing portages, and that's like carrying the board up and out, for a SUP, it's a blinking nightmare because you don't have the same construct to bring it onto the shoulders. So I've been watching videos of people doing the craft and bringing it onto their shoulders, but you can't do that with a SUP. And I've got a 14-foot board as well. And canals were not made for big crafts. They have little steps for little people to go down and get back on a boat, etc. So learning how to carry us up, carry it on my hip, carry it on my arm, and then on some of the portages, bring it above my head is a bit like having a HIIT workout in the middle of a race, and then times that by about 25. So again, as I started going into the training stages of the DW, it was really useful for me to start to understand how that was going to affect my body. So one of the biggest learnings on that for me was that my knees don't really like kneeling on concrete, especially when it's got little bits of grit on it. And if you do that 2 or 3 times and you've got grit bruise, and I've cracked my kneecap so many times, they're not in good shapes from previous sports and accidents. So I actually now use my white water pads. So they're a bit like mountain bike pads that strapped around your kneecaps and your shins, and I don't get any pain at all now. So it's little things like that that you go, "Oh, okay, this will work for," and, where's the handles on the board, and can I get extra holes to put new handles in on the board so that if I'm carrying it on my left-hand side, it needs to be carried differently perhaps to the right-hand side, or if I've got to get it up above my head, am I gonna take half of the London public out as I try and lift it up, or is there a safer way that I can do this that I'm not gonna kill myself and everyone else in the process. So it's the sport side of it, the output of your energy. I can paddle and I can do this mechanically for days, hours on end. That's fine. That's all been taken care of in 15 years of training. But it's all these little bits that haven't been that actually I need to pay attention to. So yeah, so that's been quite interesting.
Thank you for Tango Charlie Lights for sponsoring this episode. I'm particularly happy about this because I love the product. I use my Tango Charlie Lights day to day whenever I'm paddling in the dark. Most of my paddling is in a busy shipping lane, so it's vitally important that I'm seen. I've also used them on big adventures that I've done around Anglesey and across the North Sea. On both occasions, I started in the dark. I used the green and red navigation lights on the back, and I used the big front light to allow me to see any waves. The favourite part of Tango Charlie Lights for me is they have a variety of options to suit every application, and they suit every type of boat that I have, surf skis and K1s. If you want to learn more about the lights and other accessories that Tango Charlie has, go to tangocharlielights.com.au.
I love the knee pads idea. That's one of those, I think exactly how you're describing, even for the kayaks and canoes, it's a similar learning of, you know what you're doing in the boat or on the board, but it's the little bits like the portages or knowing the course, knowing where the weirs are, knowing all of those bits, knowing that you need to get a pair of knee pads, knowing that you're going to use baby food pouches for homemade applesauce, whatever those tiny little things are that end up kind of making a big difference in the end.
Absolutely. And the other big learning for me on all of that for the training was that I'm so glad that I learnt whitewater SUP, because coming out of some of those weirs when you are pretty heavy legged from portaging anyway, and I've been training over that winter, and I came through Reading town centre, and it was about a month ago, and it was just okay to still do it. It just turned amber to green on the Thames charts. And it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. I spent about 20 minutes walking up through the high street to see if I could carry the board and then get back in, or was there somewhere a little bit further down that I could scramble in? And again, I'm actually really grateful that I got put through all of that and that I did that recce and that it forced me to be like that, because it's very high-sided there. And for those that don't really understand how hydraulics work, that makes it quite risky when there's a lot of water being pushed through. And you've got a lock and a weir right next to it, so the water's being shoved not just out of the lock and then dissipating into riverbanks. It's got concrete sides that it's just being taken all the way down through the town, and so it's not even dignified. If it goes wrong, you've got just about the whole population of Reading there. But because I did that and it was at its worst, and I took the time to neurally map it, I now know that I'm really in control of that situation when I'm there, and perhaps that's a point where somebody else wouldn't be, and that becomes risk or lost energy again.
It's funny, you're talking about all of these learnings and you're making me relive all my fears from my very first junior DW. The Oracle Shopping Centre was petrifying. But yeah, you're right. Getting into the flow after some of the big Thames weirs is hard. Down the bottom end of the course, that it's big. It's looking like it might be quite a low year this year, so you might not have that worry.
No, and that's really good. But I'd always say to people, train for the worst.
Yeah.
Don't train for it to go well. Train for it to go wrong, because then you'll have a lovely time when it goes right.
Well, when you said that you'd been training through winter in very different weather to what you might get on race day, I've done 11 DWs and I've had every single weather condition. You can have anything at Easter.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you train for the worst, it's no problem. It's just another day at work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Emily, you're not going to be the only one taking on DW on a SUP this year, right? Is it Paddy McCormack who's going to be taking it on with you? Is that right?
That's right. And Paddy's an amazing paddler. I went and paddled his race last year, the Burn, which he just took off and was this bear of an Irish guy who just made me look like a tiny little toddler next to him. And I know that Paddy's super excited to come, because last year when we were there, he was saying that it's super expensive for them to try and come over and paddle over here, because they can't get the boards on the airline anymore. And I took my airline inflatable SUP and raced there last year, and they were all like, wow, it's 20 inches wide. That's incredible. That's a game changer. Um, and Paddy had sort of been building quite a big scene for endurance paddling in Ireland, and he was really excited to hear about some of the races that we have in SUP. But he comes from a kayaking background, and you could just see that, you know, when this was talked about, you could just see that there was, same as me, a little twinkle that went in the eye that, yeah, this is something a little bit different. There's a reason this race has existed for so many years, and that it's just one of those things you really, if it's in you, you've just got to go and give it a go. So I'm super excited that he's coming over.
That's great. And Paddy's a pretty accomplished paddler. I was looking at some of his recent results. So in 2023, at the SUP 11 Cities Tour, he did the nonstop of that, where he came sixth, which is very impressive. Are you two strategizing about paddling together, do you think? Or do you think you'll, play it by ear?
Yeah, we're very different paddlers, and this is the other thing that I love about paddle sports. Is just like art; it's very subjectional. You know, what somebody sees as a beautiful piece of modernism, another person will be like, "What?" And paddlers are the same as well, and how they look at it and what they do. And Paddy's actually said that he doesn't want too much information. He doesn't want to take it all, obviously, the amount that he needs to have to be safe. But he really enjoys being challenged and questioned every moment of his paddle, because it keeps him in the present, and it keeps him thinking forward. Whereas I like to know, maybe it's just that whole male female thing, I don't know. I like to know what's coming, but he just is like, yeah, just get on with it and deal with it. So I'm sure he'll absolutely fly it and be down the bottom waving at the other end. It can be a hare and tortoise race for us.
That's great. Well, it sounds like it'll be a true test. Two very different paddlers. You'll each be doing your own thing. It sounds like you've done a ton of preparation for it as well, and you're really coming into this very well informed and well trained.
Yeah, as I say, it's been an absolute privilege to do the training, and it's been a really enjoyable thing. And I just honestly so grateful, because I do know how important it is that the volunteers there are doing what they do, because none of us could go out and do what we're doing without them all being there. So
did we get the rough estimate on your timing, Emily, or are you going to keep that under wraps for now?
Keep that quiet.
I think, well, again, it really comes down to flow and wind. I'm hoping we have a little bit of wind pushing from just behind us. That would be really nice. My training times, I'm aiming for 7K an hour. If I can do that, then I'll be happy.
Really looking forward to following along, and best of luck in your race.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
really
good luck.
Thank you so much. Yeah, amazing. See you on the other side.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. That was really interesting to hear from Emily King, who is going to be one of the first people to attempt the Devizes to Westminster on a stand-up paddleboard with Paddy McCormack as well. I am really looking forward to seeing how they get on this weekend. It is really challenging to be a pioneer in a race when you are in a different craft from what the race was, started with, or what it was designed for. And DW did actually start, I think, with folding boats back in 1948. So the race has certainly evolved over the decades. Billy, what did you think about what Emily said? You were a little bit of a DW SUP skeptic going into that conversation. What do you think now?
Yeah, I have to admit, I wasn't the biggest fan of SUPs going for DW, but Emily actually really impressed me. She's really meticulous in her training. She's built up her mileage really sensibly, and she's done a lot of course recce's. I don't think any part of that course is going to be new to her, which is going to be a real strength.
I'm looking forward to seeing how it pans out.
Me too. I think there was one aspect, we've talked about the DW Stages race here, which is the 4-day version. A lot of what we talked about in our previous episode was purely the nonstop version. So the nonstop version, even in canoes and kayaks, is only open to teams of doubles. One thing we chatted about with Emily that was after we stopped recording the interview, but she brought up the idea of tandem SUPs, which I find really, really interesting. And is that something that we could see as a growing class of SUP in the future? Is that maybe the way that we could see a nonstop version of DW opening up to stand-up paddleboarders, assuming that this year's trial for SUPs in the Stages race goes well? Emily pointed out that the only tandem SUPs right now are mostly just inflatables, and that's a bit of a sort of limiting factor in terms of speed, especially over such long ultra endurance distances. And it's not a very competitive class. We do see tandem SUP at some races. So the Head of the Dart happened recently, another UK race with a lot of stand-up paddleboarders. And looking at those results, there were several teams who did that in tandem. So they've got a tandem class and a dragon class at the Head of the Dart. It's great to see people out there doing tandem at the race, but they are still quite a bit slower than the singles paddlers. So the fastest times in the men's for that race was Will Keatley, who won the men's field for 14-foot boards in 1 hour, 4 minutes and 23 seconds. And in the women's category, Holly Pye won in 1 hour, 7 minutes, 49 seconds. And the fastest multi-person board in the tandem class was 1 hour and 24 minutes. So you can see there's quite a big gap there still where, longer term, if we saw this class grow, we would hopefully expect to see tandem SUPs being quite a bit faster than the solo SUPs. But I'm really curious about it. I'd love to see and learn a little bit more about tandem SUP.
This year would have been quite a good year to try tandem SUP overnight as well, actually, because of the late tide, you have got the potential to get crews going down in something like 32 hours this year. With an early tide, you don't get such a long time period to do the race. This year's tide window is very late. So yeah, you can have a sort of like a 32-hour crew go down, which could have been a tandem SUP maybe.
That's a great point. I would certainly like to see that in the future. Maybe we can bring it up for the Thames 200 Ultra as well, knowing, the insight that Emily shared about how much of a difference it made for her when she was going down with a buddy versus solo.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So let's cover some of the biggest paddling news. There's been a lot of racing over the last couple of weekends. Emily told us when we spoke to her that she was racing at SUP 12 as part of her DW training. I managed to catch a little glimpse of this, but I know you looked at it much more, Betsy. So tell us about SUP 12.
Yeah, it was live streamed for the whole 12 hours, so 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which made for great watching to be able to kind of hop in and hop out of that. So that was done by Sarah SUP Junkie and Simon from SUP FM. And it looked like Emily had a really good race there. So she told us she was going to do that as part of her DW training. And it's certainly an ultra endurance event. So she managed to complete 21 laps, which was 73.5 kilometers during that 12-hour window at the race. And she finished second woman overall behind Tanja Ecker. So I think that's a really good result for Emily. And I expect she was also probably pacing herself a little bit, knowing that that was only a week before DW. I also noticed that it looked like the total mileage completed by the racers at SUP 12 this year was down a little bit from the last couple of years. It looked like they maybe had a little bit more swell. It was a little bit more challenging with the conditions, which could have contributed to that slight decrease in mileage for some of those top racers. We did see similar names towards the top. So Tanja, as I mentioned, was the top woman and second place overall. So she did 25 laps. And PJ Simmons won overall. So he was in first place for the second year in a row, and he completed 28 laps of the course. So that was 98 kilometers. There was also a newer name to the race, which was Carlo Arias from Costa Rica, and he finished in third place. He did 23 laps. He is another one who's also done the SUP 11 Cities race. In the multi-day SUP 11 Cities race last year, he finished in third place behind Itzel Delgado and Martin Tieckmann. And Carlo mentioned on the live stream that he has been specializing a bit more in ultras. And he came over to the UK for the race from a SUP camp, a training camp in Fuerteventura, had a really bad time with the travel, only arrived shortly before the race, and still managed to pull off a third place overall. So I expect we might see more of Carlo in the SUP Ultra endurance scene coming up. We also have to give a brief race recap on the Spring SUP Race. So not ultra endurance anymore with this. This was the core sprint, technical, and long distance racing that we talked about in a previous episode, giving a preview. And I expected there to be some top names at this race and some tight racing, and the race definitely delivered. It's the first in the ICF World Cup events of this season. It was in Italy, and we are really seeing a lot of strength from the youth, particularly the young women. So a lot of the races were really dominated by women who either were juniors last year or are juniors or are just coming out of that junior category, which is incredibly impressive. And Csillag Kocsis from Hungary was a name who really stood out last season. And this year she's proving that that was not a fluke, that if anything, she is still getting better and better. She won both the technical and distance race for the open women's category. And in the distance race, the women started at the same time as the masters men. And Csillag not only won the women's race, but she actually finished in fourth place overall behind only 3 masters men and ahead of a lot of masters men who are pretty quick names themselves. So that was really impressive from Csillag. And again, she was racing junior just last year. And then again, Cecilia Pampanella, Claudia Pistiglione, Duna Gordillo. These are really young women still at the start of their SUP racing careers, not necessarily new on the scene since they've been there for a while, but really dominating the open category at a very young age.
The thing that interests me about the Spring SUP race was the 100 meters. Now, you've followed this closely since last year, so tell us about that.
So we saw the first world records for that 100-meter distance set in Sarasota last year. And when those records were set, there was a bit of a headwind on the course. So I think everyone knew that they could get faster. What I found really exciting was that not only did Andrey Kraytor improve on his world record from last year, he massively improved on it and broke 20 seconds. So he raced in Sarasota in 23 seconds, 0.05. And his time in Italy at the Spring SUP race was 19.799, which is unbelievably fast. I will say
Massive.
There were no starting gates. Yeah, and he's got some great videos on Instagram that you can go and watch, which I highly recommend taking a look at, just to see like visually what does that look like for someone to do 100 meters in under 20 seconds on a SUP. There were not starting gates on the course at the Spring SUP race. So, I'm not sure if this is something we should definitively consider as a new world record. I think maybe that's something that probably has to be set on slightly more standardized courses with those starting buckets and lane markings and everything. But it's definitely an incredibly impressive result. And I expect to see at the World Championships again this year some similarly fast times and big improvements on the records that were set last year.
Do you know, if I was in my K1, I think that would be a close race. But I've never measured myself over 100 meters, but I'm willing to bet that would be close. I'm pretty slow off the line.
The high kneel C1ers at the Olympics, the 200 meter race, the women do it in, I think, about 45 seconds, the winners. I had to double check because I think it actually went a little bit faster than that last year. So, I mean, I think, you could probably put him in a race against those high kneel canoeists too, and it would be a real question of whether the canoe or the SUP is faster.
I think I'll test that in training next week. And if next week when you tune in there's an empty seat here, you'll know it's because I didn't make the 19.79 seconds.
And then in the long distance race, we saw a really big win for Donato Vriends from the Netherlands, who won just ahead of Eitan Brie from France. And it was Sergio Cantoral-Quirant who won the open men's technical. So it was a really good racing at the Spring SUP race. What about on the marathon side? I know you were following the Amsterdam Waterland Marathon pretty closely, Billy.
Yeah, I was looking at that. I couldn't go, unfortunately, but watched from a distance. We had some paddlecast sources on the scene. On the tally chart with our first prediction of the year, I think we got it right with James Russell winning. He beat the Norwegian Siver Borge, who's the Norwegian marathon champion. And rounding off the podium was also Will Stroud. Will is a very good paddler from the UK. I don't believe Will's done too much international paddling, but it's only a matter of time, really, before he breaks through. The interesting thing about James and Will are that they're both from the same club. They're from the Chelmsford Empire. And although I used to have a bit of rivalry with the Chelmsford Empire, I've come to respect it massively. It's pumped out a serious number of top quality paddlers. The women's race, we were pretty on the ball with our predictions, but it wasn't quite as close. So Panacinco won by quite a margin, with Caroline Fink in second. Odette, our local hero, was third. Odette is still aiming for the World Games. This was her first selection race of the year. The junior race was won by Leonardo Candela. He was narrowly ahead of Will Stroud in the overall.
That's impressive racing from a junior.
We also had the Aussie Nationals this weekend. And once again, with the tipsters at Paddlecast, Josh Kippin won, 40 seconds clear of Casey Haynes, who won the sprint for second place. Rebecca Mann dominated the ladies' race, winning by nearly 8 minutes.
We're going to have to start keeping track of our predictions.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one.
What about the South African marathon selections? How did we do on those?
So the World Games selection for South Africa happened, and this was a seriously tight race, really top quality field. The race was dominated by Hamish Lovemore, Andy Burkett and Clint Cook, and they finished in that order in a very tight sprint finish. There's some really great drone footage online. It will be great to see Hamish go to the World Games. He's a top quality athlete. He may not choose to do it though. He may choose to focus elsewhere, which may allow Andy Burkett to defend his World Games title. So we'll wait to see on that one. They were the results of the selection race. Of course, we don't know what the athletes themselves are planning on and how they're plotting their seasons.
What about the women's race results?
The women's race, again, was close, but was won by Saskia Hockley. And in second place, Jenna Nisbet, followed by Nikki Burkett.
And I definitely want to come back on some of the sprint races that we previewed, because there's been a lot of sprint racing selections happening over the last couple of weekends as well. But we are a bit short on time, so I think we'll do a deep dive of that in the next episode. Shall we move on to some of the upcoming races to preview? I know there's some big ones coming up.
You go first, Betsy. What's coming up in the SUP world?
Coming up on the 26th to 27th of April is the Battle for Hercules in Malaga. So it's in Europe again, and we are going to see a lot of the same names who we just saw at the Spring SUP Race in Italy. But I have noticed a couple of additional names on the entry list who I'm excited to see race this season, including Alba Frey, Esperanza Barreras, and Christian Anderson. So along with the names who were not at Spring SUP Race, we will still have some returners, including Csillag Kocsis from Hungary. Let's see how many times she can repeat her winning streak that she's on right now. She's definitely an up-and-coming name. So I might, in the spirit of making predictions, I might bet on her for the technical race. Billy, what about the surfski world?
So the major race coming up is the South African Surfski Champs and the Freedom Paddle, which is doubling up as the South African Double Surfski Championships. They're both happening at the end of April, the 25th for the singles race and the 27th for the Freedom Paddle. Now, both races are going to see very high standards of racing, something we could only dream of in the UK. But they're being held, the singles are in Cape Town. And fingers crossed, if the weather plays ball, we're going to have the ending will be a Miller's Run, which will just be brilliant. Hopefully we'll see that.
That's like...
Oh, the dream. Yeah, the dream.
Miller's Run is like, if you've ever watched a really cool surf ski video online, it's probably Miller's Run.
Yeah. The list of favorites for this race is near endless, and I will attempt to tell you the former glories of these paddlers, and there's some that we don't have time for. So, favorites for the race: Nick Notton, former world champion; Kenny Rice, former world champion; Josh Fenn, former under-23 world champion; Yuli Hart, former under-23 world champion and defending national champion; Mark Keeling, 2022 life-saving champ; Hank McGregor and the Mocker brothers, who I'm not even going to bother listing, multiple world championships and top paddlers. It's gonna be absolutely rammed. It's gonna be brilliant to see. I really hope they've got a lot of cameras on the course because it's going to be brilliant. The girls' race is just as rammed with talent. We've got Kira Bester, Melanie Van Niekerk, Jade Wilson, and Georgia Singe. Georgia, and this is from one of our scouts at Paddlecast, Georgia is in her first year at under-23. She's been described as a total machine who dominates at many disciplines. Kira Bester won the Surfski World Championships in Madeira last year. She and Jade Wilson just won the K2 500 at the South Africa Sprints, which you'll go into next week. Melanie Van Niekerk was fourth in the race in Race Week in Australia. Jade Wilson won the South African Marathon National Championships last year. And it's going to be great racing. Obviously, it being in False Bay, all eyes and the pressure will be on the Orca squad.
Those are some really impressive pedigrees for all of those paddlers. I think any South African surf ski race like this is really, there'll be a few top paddlers from around the world missing, but it's pretty close to kind of like world championship level caliber.
Yeah, I would imagine it's going to be fierce competition as well, because they'll all want to be selected for Durban at the end of the year.
What about the Freedom Paddle that you mentioned?
So the Freedom Paddle round Robben Island this year doubles up as the Doubles Championships. It's a less technical course, but it would probably still be too much for me. So we may see some of the less technical paddlers hitting the front, but there's still just as many big names up the top. The overwhelming favourites for the men's is Hank McGregor and Josh Fenn. But in the women's, we might have some tighter racing. Saskia and Pippa are racing in the K2. Saskia Hockley is the current silver medalist in the K2 World Marathon Championships. Jenna Nesbitt and Nix Burkett are both very successful athletes. They believe they both come from a marathon and sprint background, but I'm not entirely sure about that. And then we've also got Kira Bester and Melanie Van Niekerk, who are probably the favourites for the women's race.
I know there's even more coming up that we want to talk about, but we're short on time today. I believe we wanted to make a brief correction on our previous news episode. Billy, we'll have to keep it quick, but we've slightly undersold. We missed out on a couple of GB women when we were talking about how great Jimbo Russell and Lizzie Broughton have been from the GB squad.
I do have some mitigating circumstances, but I forgot that Lani Belcher has won the Women's World Marathon Championships in between Lizzie being top of the tree and Jimbo now coming in. So I apologize massively. And there's some, let's not get into other medals. I'll just apologize to Lani and tell everyone to go and check out Lani's results for both Australia and for Great Britain.
I'm almost glad that we missed her out because it forced us to kind of go back and look at her results. And I really enjoyed getting to see that. She's got a very impressive paddling CV. I think that's all we have time for today. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. Our next episode will be after DW. And if you've been enjoying our Devizes to Westminster race preview content, please do tune in to the Paddler Media live stream on YouTube, which will be going live this Saturday from around 1 p.m. So check it out on YouTube. We'll be live for almost the whole time. I think we're going to take a little break during the wee hours of the morning and try and catch some rest. But from Devizes to Westminster, Saturday afternoon to Sunday morning, follow along on YouTube. See you on the water.
See you on the water, everyone.